Okay, so welcome to the IANDS Auckland group. I'm so excited to have everybody here, and this is only our third meeting, so it's really great just to see the group thriving and growing. If you're listening to this on YouTube, we also have a Facebook group. It is IANDS Auckland, and you can request to join in there. So we're predominantly an Auckland group. However, in saying that, we also have a lot of people right throughout New Zealand who come into this group. We've got some people from overseas. We've got very strong links with the Sydney group. And also we welcome anybody from any part in the world who's interested in these types of topics. So I'm very excited because today we have got brand new author Caroline Barron joining us, who has the most beautiful book. And Caroline, I'm going to jump in and do the formal introduction, and then I'll switch over to you and you could take it away, and then we'll have some Q&A time at the end there. So Caroline Barron, she's an award-winning writer and author of Ripiro Beach, a memoir of life after near death. She had a near-death experience after bleeding out on an operating table during the birth of her youngest daughter in 2011. It was an experience that's changed her forever, especially as she previously had a very strong fear of death after losing her father on her 20th birthday. I still think that's so rough to lose your dad on your birthday. So Caroline Barron, welcome to IANDS Auckland. Thank you for being our guest today, and I'm going to hand things over to you if you wish to share a bit about your story and tell us a bit about what you've been up to.
Thank you, Kirsty. It's so nice to be here, and it's really great to see you again. We chatted over lockdown a little bit, and you were the first person I really spoke to about the book in terms of, you know, a group of any sort. And since then, it's been a complete whirlwind.
I've been watching that.
Yeah, I know. I've just come up this morning a long interview with Jim Mora on Radio New Zealand, which was a really great interview. But I just love that we can talk here about a really specific aspect of the book, which is the NDE and the reverberations through life that one has because of an event like that. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you for being here. It's so cool. I've loved our conversations and loved seeing, that whirlwind. It has just taken off for you, which is brilliant.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about your experience. Tell us about your book.
Sure. Well, here it is here, Ripiro Beach.
Beautiful, isn't it?
And look, when I set out to write this book, I actually was trying to write it as a novel. I then tried to write it as essays. I then tried to write it as short stories. But what kept pressing upon me really was that this needed to be a memoir. It needed to be a true story. And even more than that, it wasn't just about family history. It was about that day on the 4th of May 2011, where I went into hospital and almost didn't come out. And it soon became obvious to me after a really long time that that was where this story actually began. So I was quite surprised by that. I didn't anticipate for that to be the anchor to this book. But I thought I'd just read a little bit from the beginning, from chapter 1, which describes what happened in those moments. So to put it into context, I'd had my first daughter 19 months earlier, and then I had a planned cesarean section because the placenta was low-lying. So I went into hospital, had a kind of a tricky pregnancy in terms of little things kind of kept going wrong. I had to have an amniocentesis, the baby was lying wrong. So all of these things happened. So I was a little bit nervous anyway. But then after Hazel was born, my beautiful young daughter, after she was born, and I went out into post-op, and that's where things suddenly started going wrong. So I'll just read you a little bit from the start of the book.
Thank you.
Okay, the room is so very quiet. I cannot open my eyes, this dipping in and out, lifting, then crushing me. I have to stay awake long enough for anyone to see that something is wrong. Cool air from where Jez, my husband, lifts the sheets. wetness between my legs. My eyes follow his to the floor to where something has been spilled, a syrupy pool. I'm confused, wondering what it could be, then notice that it's dripping from above, from the gurney. Shit, he says, doctor! He's yelling now, his voice telling me something is wrong. And then the noise sucks back in violently at unbearable decibels, and in an instant my brain computes. It's blood, I think. That pool on the floor is blood, my blood. I'm horrified, weak, vanishing. A loud summoning buzzer, footsteps running, the specialist, her face in mine, her warm bedside manner evaporated. You're hemorrhaging, she says, deadpan. Do we have permission for a hysterectomy? The lights all around me, and noise, so much noise that it's as though it's coming from within me. A nurse thrusts a pen into my hand, holds out a clipboard. Of course, I think, whatever it takes. The blood keeps weeping from inside me onto the floor, and I know that this is very, very bad. My eyes lock with Jez's. I'm frightened, I'm trying to say. He's pale, stationary, frightened too. I scribble CB on the page, but my pen slips off as the gurney turns 180 degrees and speeds down the hallway. I remember thinking 3 things. First, that this was just like a theatre emergency episode of Grey's Anatomy. Second, that I won't be able to have any more babies. And third, and this thought pulsed deeply, repeating, rising above the rest, that this couldn't possibly be it. Surely not. Life had just begun. Bright lights, ragged breathing so loud inside the damn mask that strapped over my face, gurney wheels squeaking. Suddenly Mum is with me, there inside my mind. She lays her cheek against mine, but I cannot make out what she's whispering. I hold on for as long as I can until I know that they know something is wrong, then let myself slip beneath the sea of black. A second or hours later, still unconscious, I somehow emerge into daylight. In this vision or dream or whatever it is, we're at home in Point Chev. I'm there but not. I'm part of the breeze, the sunlight. I'm outside looking in through the lounge window by the red couch. Dexter is asleep on his dog bed outside my daughter George's room. And although I can't see her, I know our calico cat, Bells, is stretched out in a patch of sun in the end room. Jez and Georgia, 19 months old when her baby sister is born, are on the wheat-coloured mat, stacking pegs into towering rainbows on a board, blue, yellow, red, green. Beside them, asleep in her capsule, is baby Hazel. She's dressed in the white woolen hat and booties laced with white ribbon that Mum knitted and has a cream blanket tucked around her. Sunlight slants through the windows by the dining table, a triangle of light pooling in front of my little family. The sun is high, so it must be afternoon, after lunch perhaps. There are flowers, so many flowers on the table and bench. Lilies, white hydrangeas, white roses, and a cherry bouquet of bright gerberas that do not seem to fit, still in brown paper on the bench. Unopened envelopes torn from bouquets lie in a pile by the fruit bowl. Hazel stirs and Jez lays a hand on her foot. She twitches, her deep ocean eyes flick open, and I swear she sees me because her eyes widen and her hands, her tiny fingers pulse as if surprised. He strokes her cheek and Georgia shuffles towards her sister, those awful navy rubber clogs she loves so much on her feet, her bottom bulky from the nappy beneath her jeans. She leans over and lays her lips against her sister's, just lies there like that, not moving. Hazel's mouth lifts, a smile I think, then she settles back down, eyes drifting closed once more. A gust of wind tugs at me. I look again through the window at my dear family and I know that I am gone from this house, those hearts, that life. It is time to go, says the wind lifting my collar. Feel me in the breeze, my darlings, I want to shout. See me amongst the trees that sway in the wind and the lapping of the waves down on Point Chev Beach. See me in the kingfisher that stands sentry every morning on the power line, and the gulls wheeling overhead. See me in the sunlight moving over the house from backyard to front. Follow me as I move all day if you wish. And then, with a final delicate gust, I am gone.
Wow, that is, you really take us on that journey, Caroline. It's just beautiful. There's so much depth and detail in that. Thank you.
That was lovely. I would just like you to keep reading, actually.
Yeah, I know. Do we have to stop?
What happens next?
Look, so that's where the story starts, and there's a couple of things in there that we might want to talk about today. One being that vision that I had of my family through that window, and it's still so clear in my mind seeing that day. And the second thing is the presence of my mother, who is alive and well still today. The presence of my mother somehow with me at that time, just telling me it's okay. And I understand now that vision, or that experience I had was supposed to be of real comfort to me, to enable me to feel safe and to enable me to go, to know that my family would be okay without me. But unfortunately, over time, and I didn't know how to process what had happened. I thought that I don't know what I thought. I just thought I was just weird or imagined it or something. I didn't know. I didn't talk about that for years and years. But when I eventually got some therapy with an amazing woman who does EMDR therapy, which is a kind of a eye movement reprogramming therapy. And what I came to understand all those years later, that vision had actually become like a recurring nightmare. It had changed from what it was meant to be. And for me, it felt like that's what death would be like, forever looking through a window at a life going on without you in it. And so that became a pretty awful thing to live with. And we touched on it in Kirsty's intro that I'd lost my father on my 20th birthday. And in the years following the near-death experience, I had a lot of other stuff going on. Within 18 months, I was back in surgery, having a back operation. And not long after that, I started all this family research and digging into the past. And my father was adopted, you see. He died when he was 50. And so he died never knowing who his birth family was. And so I kind of see it as all these parallel layers happening over a really short period of time. The near-death experience, all the ancestral discoveries that I'd had. And it was, let me tell you, it was all bad news. Everything that I'd found out about where I'd come from and who that side of the family was terribly traumatic. There was suicide, there was depression, there was a jail sentence, and there was a violent attack. There was all of this stuff that I'd found out, and it was really, really hard to deal with at that time. And then in 2016, I lost a dear friend quite quickly, over a couple of months. She had a brain tumor, and she died. And so all of those things on top of each other resulted in this very strong fear of death, discovering my grandfather, my birth grandfather too, like my father, had died suddenly of a heart attack at a young age, really had me concerned about my own mortality. And I felt as though death would come for me again soon without me having any say over it. So that was a pretty tricky way to live. And it wasn't until I started writing this book and I had the EMDR therapy that I really started to piece everything together and started to understand what had happened that day in 2011 and how it reverberated across the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? I've got one question for you, Caroline. You said right at the early part of when you started that originally this was going to be a novel, and then it was going to be some essays, and it was going to be different types of writing. Why a novel? Is that because you wanted to be disconnected from it, or was it too real? Or
I think it was too real. And also it started as more of a journey into the past, into the family history aspect, because I sort of shut the door on the near-death experience and didn't really want to think about it because I didn't know where to put it. And as women, we just have to get on, don't we? We just have to get on with life and look after the kids and keep house and work and all of these other things. So I shut the door on that. And in 2015, I did a master's at Auckland University in creative writing, and I decided to write about it was a fictionalized account of how my birth grandparents might have met. Because when Dad was born in 1946 here in Auckland, there were a lot of Americans here in town on rest and relaxation from the Pacific Theatre of War. And so it was actually quite a cool time for many young women, because all of our men were away overseas fighting in the Middle East or in the Pacific. And suddenly there were these, glamorous Americans in town with, wallets full of cash, and there were dances and there were milk bars, and there were, they were a type of men that had never been seen here before. And so I was writing a story about imagining who my grandmother would have met and how my dad's birth could have come about. And I think that was even before I'd found out for real who my birth grandfather was. So that's how I worked. That's how I worked at it. And then I kind of finished that and really didn't do anything with that. Then I started writing some essays and some life writing things. But then this story kept pressing upon me and pressing upon me. And all of these serendipitous coincidences kept happening in terms of discovering information that had previously I'd thought was impossible to ever know. And when I finally sat down to write this book as memoir, it just flowed like you wouldn't believe. The story just felt like it had to be told this way.
That's beautiful. I wonder whether you've got any insight either as to, do you think the story was always going to come out? Could you have held the story in?
I probably could have, but I would not be a well person, I think.
Exactly.
Holding this in. I had to piece it all together, and how that NDE fit with the rest of those layers of trauma that I'd experienced, so that I could, in a way, I'll never not have these experiences, but in a way now I feel like I've put it in a box of sorts and popped it on the shelf. And if I want to take it down to look at it, I can, but it's not consuming me like it did before. I did an interview with the US podcast, Life After PTSD, last week. And the most wonderful thing, after I'd told my story of the layering of trauma, the host, Jeff, asked me on a scale of 1 to 10, which in mental health often you use a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most horrendous, overwhelming feeling, and 1 being pretty much no reaction whatsoever. How did you feel recounting that trauma? And I could say quite happily 1. And that really made me feel so proud that, all these years later, I can finally say that I'm not traumatized by it like I was. And I can see that NDE for what it was meant to be as it happened, which was a comfort and an understanding of universality, and that everything was going to be okay.
Yeah, wow. I love that. You talked about how it was so real that you can go back and recount it straight away, that it's truly real to you. Yeah. Have you ever had anything else that's felt that real?
Not of that nature, really. No. I haven't. And yeah, it was strange, and I'm trying to capture it in the writing there about talking about them in the breeze and in the wind and all of those sorts of things. But that being a part of everything, and that's something that I've come to understand almost even since writing that. I didn't really know what I was trying to say when I was writing that. But yeah, there was definitely a feeling that of kind of oneness and being a part of something greater than I was.
I'd love to open this up to the group and see whether they've got any questions. I'd also love to hear spiritually, how has this changed you? How's your experience? Because you talked about being outside this window looking in on your family, and you're no longer a part of it. You're, in theory, going off with the wind. You are the wind.
Yes.
How did this change you spiritually?
I didn't really know who God was before, not so long ago. My eldest daughter, I remember walking down the path to the beach one day, and she saying to me, what is God, Mum? I didn't really know what to say to her until I just said, well, God is nature, and God is the world, and God is in everything. And I was so thrilled at 40 that I'd finally pieced together, for me personally, my own spirituality and what I believed in. And since then, I have realized, I mean, I'm a social person. I'm an extrovert. Many people think I was an extrovert, but the more distance between that experience and now, I feel I'm a lot more introverted, that I need solitude. And more than that, I need to be in nature to recharge my batteries. And if I don't have that time, I get very scratchy. So yeah, I feel like I know myself better, and I know what I need in order to stay centered in my life and be a good parent and wife.
That's beautiful. I'm going to open it up to the group. Does anyone have any specific questions for Caroline, or a part that you wish for her to expand on? Oh, we're a bit quiet today, huh?
I have some questions.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
I was curious when you were talking about your NDE. So you were having a vision of the future. It seemed like if you had remained dead, let's say, then you were sort of seeing what was going to happen in the future. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So when you were revived and came back to life, what did you think had happened to you?
When I woke, I was in the ICU, and I remember kind of lying there with my eyes closed, and it felt like I was underground. It like smelt and felt like I was underground. And so even before I opened my eyes, I remember thinking, where am I? Am I in some kind of heaven or hell? Where am I? And then I slowly opened my eyes, and I kind of looked around, and I was pretty out of it still. And I realized I was in the ICU, and I was grateful as hell that I was still alive. But I was feeling so out of it that I can't really remember a lot. The next thing I remember was my husband being there, and he had this little tiny cup, and he was squeezing my nipple, and I was like, what is going on here? and he was trying to get colostrum for the baby, because of course what you don't realize when you're in something like this is that this experience and event has deeply affected those around you, most of all my husband Jeremy. And so he was kind of left watching the doors, the theatre doors swing shut, holding baby Hazel in his arms, not knowing whether or not his wife was going to survive. And so for 2 days when I was in the ICU, he was up on the maternity ward wearing my silk dressing gown and holding the baby, chatting to all the other new mummies on the ward. So yeah, I also remember just choosing to go home probably sooner than I should have, because I wanted to be at home, but also not knowing how the heck I was supposed to look after a newborn baby and a 19-month-old toddler when I just felt broken into 1,000 pieces.
Did you tell anyone about your experience at the time, like your husband or anyone else?
Do you mean the NDE aspect?
Yeah.
The vision? Yeah. No, not for ages, because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what that was, and I kept thinking about it, and I kept thinking of my mum being close to me and resting her cheek on me. And it wasn't until ages afterwards that I could see or hear what it was that she had said to me at that time, which was, close your eyes, go to sleep, it's all going to be okay, which is exactly what she used to say to me when she'd buckle me in to the backseat of the car when I was a little girl, and we'd be driving over to my grandparents' house, which was about a 20-minute drive away from our place. And she'd say, go to sleep, everything's great, we're going to be there in a minute, you can wake up when we get there. And that was what she always used to say to me. So to have her there with me somehow was quite incredible. Yeah.
Have you told her since that she was in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
NDE?
yeah. And she's read about it in the book, and she tells me how that time was for her and how she felt so connected to me at that time. And she wasn't surprised in a way that she'd been there, because I guess she felt like she was there in a way too.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love hearing people who experience things from living people at the time. It's not so common, but that's my story as well, as experiencing someone who's alive during the near-death experience.
That's right, because your father came to you, didn't he? Your father was
there.
there.
Although I could never see him. I just knew it was him. I knew he was there. He was talking to me and I could hear his voice, but I was looking, I couldn't find him. I couldn't see him. I couldn't connect where he was. And I think it's because potentially I wasn't in a body or in a position to be able to understand the concept of space and my surroundings. Yeah, really interesting. But I love to hear these stories. And yeah, Nicole, that's a great question, because that was my question too, is did you tell your mum, and what did she say, and how does that work? You're quite close to your mother, I assume?
Yes.
Or you were back then?
Yes, yeah, we were close. We've always been close, yeah. And it's been really amazing hearing from mum's friends or people that are, related to my family somehow, and what the book has brought out is people's experience of that time through my family members. My mum's friend Michelle, said, "Oh, I remember that day so clearly, and the phone call from your mum, and she was so upset, and she didn't really know at that time what had happened." And I was so in it all for so long that I hadn't really thought, I didn't have the energy or capacity to think about how it had affected other people. Yeah, I mean, childbirth, near death or death during childbirth is far more common than we will ever know. And unfortunately, we don't talk about it as women. Like I said earlier, we just get on with it and carry on, when these experiences are things that we need to talk about. And there is plenty to learn about ourselves and the universe and who we are by those experiences. So it's been quite something. I mean, just before I came on here, my phone rang. It was a number that I didn't recognize, and it was a lady from Hamilton, a retired Moldy lady, who just wanted to ring and say thank you so much for talking about these things, because in my generation we didn't, and she didn't know her whakapapa either. And so I mean, it's connecting on so many different spiritual and whakapapa levels, I think.
Yeah, I think so. What about for you physically? So obviously you've been through this horrendous experience. Your body, you've bled out, your body's been through a bashing, and then you're in back surgery just a little bit later. What about, did you notice any changes in your body when you came back, once you got back into the rhythm of being alive and things like that? Did you notice that you had any special abilities, or anything was different?
Oh, I'd like to say that I did have special abilities, but no, I didn't notice anything like that, Kirsty.
Yeah.
I did feel broken for a long time, and that year of before I had the surgery, a year of absolute pain was really awful. And I was on heavy opiates as well, tramadol and gabapentin, for nearly, I think, 6 or 8 months I was on that. So that was also a really blurry time. And I don't know if any of you have experienced long-term pain, but it's really depressing carrying that pain around with you all the time. It impacts on everything in your life. And what I realized with that hospital experience, and in fact, I was in hospital for the back operation, and then I was in hospital 2 times after that when my youngest Hazel broke her arm twice in 2 years, and she had to be put under anesthetic to have her arm reset. And what I noticed was that was a major trigger for me, being in a hospital environment. And I would be so panicked and overwhelmed and anxious that I just couldn't cope. But do you think that I could put 2 and 2 together? No, I couldn't. I still didn't understand the impact that NDE had on the rest of my life, that it was reverberating. And 18 months ago, would you believe, I was back in hospital again for another operation, which was a hip labrum tear. So I had hip surgery. And for the first time, I can tell you that I shared everything that had happened previously in terms of my hospital experience, so that the anaesthetist and the surgeon was fully briefed on my situation and my fears and the trigger that a hospital has been in the past, so that they treated me quite carefully. I was a little bit scared, but I didn't have that panic attack that I had during the back surgery, because I thought I was going to die. That's what I thought. I'm going under and I'm going to die. And so I was so thrilled 18 months ago when I could handle that situation without fear. And when I woke up, I was so happy. I hugged the post-op nurse and told her that I loved her.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. It's no surprise, though, that you were terrified, because that's how the experience happened in the first place, right? In a hospital, it just makes complete sense to me that you would be terrified.
Yeah.
What about death? Are you still afraid of death?
No, I'm not.
Since your NDE?
No, I was scared of death for many years after that. I thought it was imminent. But it was only, and even in 2016 with my friend Caro passing, still scared, very scared, paranoid, thinking that it was going to be me. But I'm quite a practical person as well. And once I had a label on what was happening to me, which was PTSD, and I was able to get treatment for it, then I was able to get a handle on that aspect, combined with some practical things such as making sure that I was eating well. I went to the cardiologist and had every single test under the sun that you could have, and my heart is good. But I sat here in my living room yesterday with my older sister, and she was saying a passing comment. Oh, well, she's 46. Passing comment from her, oh, well, I probably won't make it till I'm 50. And I just sort of paused and I said, sis, we've got to talk about that. What you need to mitigate that with practical steps. Otherwise, you're going to keep thinking that. And in her case, it was my father dying young that makes her feel that.
Right.
All of those practical steps to make sure that you're okay and that you have proof that you're okay have really, really helped me with that aspect of death. And I talk about it now. Like I talk about it with my kids all the time. I don't try and sugarcoat it. And what I realized was that my family never really talked about dying. They didn't really talk about it at all.
And that's very, very common, isn't it? Because I come from a family where we didn't. And I was writing a blog post the other day. I didn't go to my first funeral till I was 18. I mean, that's quite late in life. And it's because we just didn't talk about death. It was just not a topic. Because it's a scary topic. It's an unknown topic. So I love that you said practical things, trying to work out. You said that your sister had that comment of, well, I might not last that long. You said, well, hey, we need to look at this. What are some of those practical things that people can do?
Definitely the medical side, getting checkups and asking for the right help. But sometimes you need to be quite bolshy about that, because my GP, love my GP, but really there were some things that happened along the way where she should have really put, 2 and 2 together and realized what was going on and got me some help rather than just, it wasn't just medical, it was layers within my soul that I needed help with. So the practical aspect of getting your health check, make sure that you're eating right and talking about it with friends. I was prescribed citalopram, which I'm no longer taking, but I took it it's an SRA antidepressant, and I took it for about 8 months. And that was the best thing I could have done, because it really helped me reset this loop that I was in. So that was like the final piece of the puzzle to give myself a break from my own head. And I owned a big model and talent business for a decade. I'm a successful woman. I've had lots of interesting and exciting things happen in my life. So I was always the strong one. I was always the strong sister in my family. And so I felt like I couldn't really talk about that stuff with my family because it wasn't the role that I I
Mm.
played in the family. And there was, when Mum read the first draft of the book, she was actually really, really upset. I don't go into that in too much detail in the book, but I can tell you guys here now, she was pretty upset that I hadn't shared a lot of that journey with her. And so it's really sweet now. She'll ring and she'll say, "How are you?" No, but how are you really?
What haven't you told me?
Yeah, how are you really? And so in a way it's opened up a lot more, even closer relationship, to be able to be vulnerable and to be able to talk about those things. And in turn, I'm able to talk about them with my children. We talk about that everybody dies. We talk about crappy stuff happens in life, and it's just all about how you deal with it and how you develop resilience. So I'm trying to face these things more head on than I've ever done before.
I love that approach too. Yeah. I have one final question for you, and then I'd love to open up for some Q&A if any of the other ladies have any questions. My final question is, we've talked a lot about the practical side, you've talked about the experience itself. What about why did this happen? Purpose, where does that come into it? Have you got any thoughts around things like predestination, whether we've got free will in life, whether we've got choice, whether things are predetermined? What are your thoughts on some of those more abstract parts of a near-death experience?
Sure. Well, I don't know if I can show. No, I can't show you. But up on my shelf there, I've got some letters, and they spell L-U-C-K-Y, lucky, because I've always felt like a really lucky person in my life, and so does my husband. So even despite all of this stuff that seems to be pretty horrible that's happened, I still feel like a lucky person. And so I think that that's been so helpful in my life, and that has enabled me to be a glass half full rather than a glass half empty person. And so I just see it as a tapestry. I see it as part of the fabric of life and who we become. It did take me a long time to realize, because for a long time I wanted to be back to be that person that I was before. I wanted to be that person. I think I say in the book, the person who matched your earrings with their underwear. I mean, really, go figure. I used to do that. I wanted to be that person, but I couldn't because I had no energy left. And so I've realized that you can't go backwards in time, that every version of you gather with you, and you take her and her and her and her into the future to be a new person. So that's really helped me move forward in life. And having a supportive family, of course, and an amazing husband who is just so laid back and cool and has been there the whole way, and who knew all the way that somewhere in there was the girl he fell in love with. So that's been really, really great. But in terms of why did it happen, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, it comes down to DNA, doesn't it, and genetics, a lot of that stuff. It's just what it is. But as I say to my girls, it's not the bad stuff that happens. It's how you deal with it and move on. But it's a good question. I haven't really thought about that a great deal, because I don't like to dwell on the why me aspect.
Yeah. I think it can also be, I'm a very curious person, so I'd like to question pretty much everything that comes across my path. So for me, why did this happen to me? When I first came out of hospital, it was, why did this happen to me? It was quite a negative thing. But then over time and quite quickly, it became, well, why did this happen to me? This is cool. This is really great. Why did it happen? But obviously when you're in the thick of the trauma, you're in the thick of, well, for you, for me, the illness and the side effects of all the medication and the drugs and everything that's going on, it can be quite a negative question, why did this happen to me? But I think over time it can be quite a positive thing. So I guess that's my curious mind jumping in there, wondering about that. And then wondering again, bigger picture, is this from a higher power? Is there a higher source involved in this? Or that's why I like to ask why.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and a really good angle on it as well. It's quite a different sort of question, isn't it? But that feeling of propulsion in writing Ripiro Beach, when I tried not to write it for such a long time, that felt really mystical to me, and as if it was meant to be. Like I say, the doors just kept opening and opening and opening, and it just flowed through like you wouldn't believe. So, maybe my journey is to be able to present this story to other women and men, but mainly women, and to help them understand that there is a way forward as well, because the connection points with women about the near death, and also about the trauma and the layers of trauma and the fear of death. It's been really amazing, the connections and touchstones that people have found with the story. A lot of people have said, you're a crazy woman for bearing your soul. But I don't care, I don't care.
Yeah.
I really don't care what people think of me. All I care about is that if one woman can read this story and not have to take 6 years to get the help that she needs, then it's worth it. Yeah. And this book was turned down by all of the big publishers. My agent took me out for a drink the other night to celebrate the book release. And she said, "Oh, I can't wait to see that publisher X," I won't say her name, because at the time she said to me, "It's beautiful writing, but no one is going to read this book." And she said to this woman, "Women want to know other women's stories. It's really important." And we've sold 1,000 copies in 10 days, with the launch of this book. So that just goes, I said to my agent at the time, when she told me that, I said, "Thank you for not telling me that way back then at the time when we hadn't sold the book, because that would have been really hard to handle. But yeah, thank you for telling it to me now."
Yeah, exactly. I know your book's going to help people. I mean, even here, as you read that part at the beginning, and then we're all going, we want to know what happens. We're not done yet. Don't stop. Your book will help so many people. And I love that attitude as well. If it just helps one woman to understand the healing journey can be quicker and not to wait all that time. That, for me, that's purpose. For me, that's the bigger picture right there. So I love it. I'd love to open up questions to the other ladies if anyone has any questions or something they want to chat about. Now is your time.
I'm just curious how her husband has dealt with all this. Has his loss of her periodically, has that caused him post-traumatic stress disorder? Is he reacting okay?
Good question. He is, like I said, he is a really laid back guy. He is quite a simple guy in terms of the way that he sees the world. He grew up in an orchard in the Hawke's Bay. He's very creative. He's not really, like, he calls some of the stuff that I like to talk about, my smoke and mirrors stuff, and under that label he has like chiropractic, osteo, NDE, so he kind of boxes that over here. But that's actually been really great, because he's offered a really practical kind of constant presence beside me. And the Ripiro Beach of the book is where we eventually, in 2016, found a house on a piece of coastline in New Zealand where we made our holiday home. And that for us has been an incredible journey, because it's a piece of land, it's a place away from the city where we both can work on the garden and have a mutual project to work on. But he is incredibly resilient. Like, I'm just amazed, physically resilient and emotionally resilient. And so, to answer your question, has he suffered PTSD? No, I don't think he has, but I think he has suffered a pretty fractured relationship for a number of years, until I got the help that I needed, because I was really angry. And I didn't know what I was angry at. And I would yell at my kids, and I would yank them out of the bath too hard. I would go from 0 to 100 in a second. And so he was the parent that had to, smooth over all of that. And it must have been really hard for him. It must have been really hard for him to put up with that for such a long time. But it feels like we're back. It feels like we're back, and that's an amazing feeling.
Super.
Carolyn, I was really interested in your choice of words where you said broke it into 1,000 pieces. Can you explain that a bit more?
You mean when I'd come out of hospital with Hazel?
I'm not exactly sure. I was just really interested in that actual experience, because the reason I raise it is because it sounds to me like almost like a dismemberment, which we talk about in shamanism, and which is really like part of an initiation process. And I just wondered, how people are sort of broken down their identity, who they used to be before. And you alluded to this too, in that you kept rebuilding yourself over time, reinventing yourself. And it just, like, lots of people that I've spoken to have had these experiences. The more I hear them, the more they sound like an initiation experience.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. Wow, that is really interesting. So I describe it as trying to gather the pieces of myself back together that are like orbiting out. I feel like I've kind of dispersed, and I'm trying to grab everything back and put it back inside me. So that particularly the aspect of identity and self, I find really fascinating, because it was like I was trying to rebuild identity. And so that concept of initiation and within shamanism, I'd love to know more about that. And so, what's the intention of that when they are having that initiation process?
Well, my thinking is that people, and I'm not saying that everyone has this experience, has an initiation, becomes a shaman. I'm not saying that, but I've invented a word called shamanized. They're sort of shamanized. In that it's like an invitation. Let me put it this way: in classical shamanic practices, people have experiences where they are symbolically dragged off by the spirit, and a near-death experience is just like that. It's part like being dragged off by the spirits, and it could be great spirit, as from a shaman's perspective or indigenous person's perspective. And they spend time away from their tribe. And so there's like they undergo a separation process from the family, the community, etc., purely because of their experiences. And then they're dismembered, their identity is broken down. And then during the experience, their identity is put back together again. A bit like Humpty Dumpty, who fell off the wall, couldn't put the pieces back together again, But it's never meant to happen like that. So they do eventually rebuild a new identity, but they never fully reintegrate into the situation they were in before. They often sort of feel a little bit like they're still on the outer. They never quite go back because they've had a different experience, which is beyond the range of a normal human experience,
Yes.
So they always feel sort of separate to other people.
Or like there's a gap between themselves and other people.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like either a little distance or a big distance or something like that. So I'm really curious. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking the terminology that the word you're using, it's like it just fits a classic initiation experience.
Yeah.
And then
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say the role, to answer your question, the role of that is for that person then to teach their tribe what they learn through their experience, and which you're doing through writing a book.
Oh, I just got shivers up my arms with that. That's really interesting. Look, and part of the ancestral discoveries that I made was finding out that I was Moldy, which is something I never knew. So my father died in 1996 without ever knowing who his birth parents were. And when I found out his birth father's name and started doing the research, my great grandmother was a Māori woman called Witapārani Minarapa, who my English great grandfather partnered with when he arrived with a baby in his arms in 1837 to the Hokianga in Northland. And little did I know, when we bought our holiday home at Ripiro Beach, little did I know that Witaparane's hapu, which is the sub-tribe of an iwi is a tribe and a hapu is a sub-tribe, that is all the land of my ancestors. And it was after we got there that I figured all that out. So it feels as though I was drawn back to a place in my past. And yeah, there's definitely some spiritual elements going on for me around that land. In Moldy, it's called Turanga Waiwai, a place to stand. You know, and that is my place to stand, even though I've only known it for such a short time. So coming back to your, Cheryl, your concept of that reintegration of identity, I certainly feel that there's something in that, and it's involved with the Māori side of my whakapapa and that land. So, but I feel like it is a lifetime of discovery and understanding ahead, and I haven't figured it all out. So I just look forward to continuing the journey.
Yeah, and it will flow on for the rest of your life. Yeah.
I love that we're never done learning, are we? As you were talking, and I love that question too, Cheryl, I was reminded I did an interview quite recently, and the girl described exactly what you've both just been talking about. She said her world was shattered, and the way that she described it to me was a jigsaw puzzle. And she said, but all the jigsaw puzzle gets made again, but she's that one piece. You know when the piece isn't quite the right piece and it sticks out a little bit? And
yes.
you know, you can't push it, it just doesn't quite go in. She said that from her NDE, she felt like she was sticking out of the puzzle, that everything had come apart into 1,000 pieces or 500 or whatever it is that you do in your puzzle. She was the piece and it just didn't quite fit in, but it was the right piece. If you looked at the image, everything looked perfect, but it just didn't quite fit into that hole.
Wow.
So as you were both talking of that, I was reminded instantly of another experiencer who talked about this. And I think they're such amazing experiences, aren't they? Because they do just totally change everything. And yet we come back into our body and everything's kind of different, and yet it's not different, but it is. So yeah, I wanted to share that with you because I was reminded of that as you're talking. Yes, a lot of learning, and I love that you're seeing all the stuff, Caroline. I'm so interested to follow your journey as you learn more, especially around our cultural history, and you know, you've got the family piece in there, which is lovely. Are there any other questions before we end up, or how are we feeling?
Actually, I was just two things. One was I totally agree with what you're saying about shamanism, because I've heard that before. The crossover between shaman and shamanic journeying and NDEs is quite significant. Ken Ring talked about this actually. You probably have. Have you talked to him, Cheryl, about it?
No. I've sort of come across this because I now teach shamanic journey and all those practices. Yeah.
So he sort of theorized about that too, that there's sort of, he called it the access code, that there is many ways to access this realm that that you have accessed, Caroline. Most people don't know about them. Shamans do. They're trained to access that realm consciously and deliberately, and have received training around that and preparation, so that when they access it, they know what they're in and what to do. Whereas NDEs get thrown into it unprepared and unexpectedly. So you have a like crash course in a way of shamanism, the hard way. Some people don't make it out so well as you have, but yeah, other people do work it out themselves. But yeah, so I have heard that analogy before, and I think it's a really good one.